Welcome, fellow bookworms, to Tibra's Den. My name is Whitney, and we are reading Nora Roberts' Legacy. We just finished chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16, so those are the chapters we are discussing today. As always, there are spoilers because we are discussing these chapters and these characters, and this set of chapters have a pretty big spoiler. So if you're not quite to this point, definitely jump off this video and then come back once you are to this point. And of course, if you haven't started reading this book, I strongly recommend you get it and go ahead and read, and then you can follow along with these videos as you read each set of chapters, and that way you can kind of participate in the discussion questions as well. It's never too late to do that. And on that note, if you're still here and you're not worried about spoilers, I do also want to add a trigger warning because we are going to be talking about the loss of a loved one. So let's go ahead and jump right into it with chapter 13. Dom recognizes his need to give up the car keys. As we get older, how difficult do you think it is to balance independence and the need to rely on others in order to be safe? And I think it's really difficult to achieve that balance sometimes. Sometimes pride can get in the way. You don't want to admit you need help. And also, I think for some elderly, they don't want to be a burden. So, they won't admit that they need help because they don't want to burden others. And so I think that can be extremely difficult. And like I said, sometimes they're just proud and they don't want to admit that they can't do what they used to be able to do. And then sometimes I do think it's also, they can be a little bit resentful of that, especially if the caretakers who are coming in kind of strip them of all their independence. That can kind of cause a little bit of resentment because they are still capable. A lot of the times they have to be careful of how they do certain things, or they can't do certain things anymore, but they can still do other things. And so I do think it's kind of a hard thing to find that balance, especially when you have the elderly that are trying to find that balance, and then the caretaker that's coming in and trying to find that balance as well, as far as what they can still do safely and allowing them to do that, but knowing what they need help with and making sure that they get that support and that help without causing any sort of resentment. And it happens to everybody, unfortunately, but I like how Dom, it wasn't Adrian forcing him to give up his car keys. He recognized that he was no longer safe driving, and he voluntarily gave up the car keys. And I think a lot of times that's not how it goes. A lot of times, the elderly are kind of forced to give up their car keys because they just don't want to admit that they're not safe anymore. So the next question. In this chapter, Dama talks about the memories the old schoolhouse holds. In chapter 11, Raylan talked about the echoes of memories in the house he shared with Laura Lee. What do you think it is about the energy some places give off that allow people like Dom and Raylan to recognize the history and picture a future? And it is important to note, Dom and Raylan both had personal memories with these locations, which isn't always the case. Dom went to school in the old schoolhouse when he was a young child, and so he has that personal memory of going to school and learning and then playing and all that. And then Raylan, when they first got the house, it was kind of a fixer-upper, so he did have like a certain vision of it and how it could be, and the potential it had for a family home. And then and then as him and Laura Lee lived there, then it became a personal kind of energy for him. But I do think certain places give off energy, whether that's good or bad. And I think sometimes it's bad energy and people don't even attempt to touch it. And then other times it's good energy, and people want to restore it. And I think even when people want to restore things, they don't always have the vision for the future of a place, like Raylan and Dom. So like the old schoolhouse has been renovated and turned into many different things, but it was never successful. Where I think, Dom's vision, I think, can certainly be very successful, especially because it kind of honors the history of the old schoolhouse, and it's using that history to kind of move forward for new generations, which I think is pretty cool. So what do you think about the author's ability to capture the essence of what family is while showing how family can take on many different forms? And this is mainly referencing the kind of big dinner they had with everybody. Harry was there, Tisha, Lauren, Hector. So it's kind of referencing that part of the book in that chapter. And I think it was really beautiful. I think what really struck home for me is, one, you had a certain like version of family with everybody there, because it was kind of like an extended family get together. So yeah, they're not related by blood, but I kind of saw it as no different as like when we get together for family reunions and it's, you know, my aunts and cousins and everything. We're not a part of everyday lives together, but we're still family, and that's kind of what I saw in this get together. And I also liked it, you know, you had your more I don't know what word to use, and I know this isn't the right word, but the more traditional family dynamic, you know, with a mother, father, and the kids. And then you also had the same sex family with Harry and his partner. And I liked how it was just accepted. Like, it just was. And that's how it should be in real life, and unfortunately, it's not. And I liked, she captured it really well with Phineas, how do you say his name? I'm bad with pronunciations, with Phineas, and he was like Daddy Harry and Daddy Marshall. You know, there was just, it just was like, it wasn't awkward or anything like that, and that's how it should be, and unfortunately it's not. So I think she captured it really, really beautifully, and I just loved that whole little portion of that chapter. I thought it was really well written. So last week we touched on the poet's control slipping. In this chapter, Harry brings up the fact that the poet is escalating. What do you think about Adrian's choice for not telling the others? And I think her reasoning was sound. Like, I understand her reasoning with, I think it was Tisha was just about to give birth. And you know, Dom's getting older and kind of slowing down. She didn't want to worry him, add more stress. So I do understand her reasoning, but with the poet escalating and not knowing for sure that he was gonna not take any further steps or further action, I really think it was important to include at least some of the others. So maybe she didn't want to tell Tisha, but she could have pulled Monroe aside and said, hey, this is happening. I don't want to add extra stress on Tisha, but just in case you guys notice anything weird, that way you can, you know, just be aware. I don't know that he'll actually act on anything. He never has in the past, or she. We don't know. So they never have in the past. But that's how I think she should have handled it. And plus, I think, you know, with the poet escalating, it's extra stress on her. And I think she could have used the support from those around her as well. Like I said, I understand her reasoning for not, but I do think it was important that she should have included the others so they could have been aware as well. But that's all for chapter 13. Let's go ahead and move on to chapter 14. Adrian says Raylan a personalized workout regimen, then brings over equipment. Do you think she is overstepping? And I do think she is a little bit, but in this situation, I think it's okay. Like, I think you really have to look at the situation. You know, Raylan, he's not like extremely overweight or suffering like an eating disorder or something like that. You know, he definitely has lost pounds, you know, as after he lost Laura Lee, he lost some of his muscle and his weight and such. Um, but he's also not the type to really take it personally. Like, you're too skinny, you need to bulk up or anything like that. And with Adrian, it really comes from a place of caring. Like, she's just not going to walk up to some random person on the street and say, oh, you need to do this workout, you know. And so I do think she was overstepping a little bit, especially not so much with the personalized workout, but bringing over the equipment. But she also kind of knows Raylan fairly well and knew he wasn't going to, you know, go get equipment on his own. And also he's busy, and so it was her way. She cares about him. You know, he's important, even though they're not quite to that point yet. He's still important, and you know, he's part of family because he's her best friend's brother and everything. And so I think it really came from a place of caring and recognizing, you know, that he was busy and he wasn't going to take the initiative of on his own. And I think even if he hadn't utilized the workouts or the equipment, she wouldn't have any hurt feelings over it either. And so I think, you know, yes, but at the same time, I don't think it really was for that particular situation. So we discussed previously how Raylan has adjusted to small town life. How do you think Adrian has adjusted? And I think with Adrian, Raylan grew up in the small town. Like I said, last week he has those small town values. So it's just kind of getting back into the rhythm of the things he already knew well. Where with Adrian, she only visited in the summertime and she really, was more city, lots of travel and such. But I think she's adjusted really well. I think we really see that with the interaction with the postmaster or mistress or whatever they're called. Chatting with her about her granddaughter, and then, well, I'm going to bring a workout set since she enjoys that. What's her favorite color? And we know she's going to do it. She says she's going to do it. She's going to do it. And that's kind of that small town value. And I think part of it, she does get that from her grandparents. But I think, the fact that she has just kind of slid so effortlessly into small town living, even though her background, is more city and travel and everything. I think she's adjusted really, really well. So we discussed previously how, as a kid, Raylan was intuitive and compassionate. How do you think this has transferred to the man and his ability to recognize Adrian's upset and get her to open up about the poet? And so I had a feeling it was going to kind of come into play later on, kind of how intuitive he is and compassionate he is. And I think it definitely, we see that with his interaction when he recognizes, she's upset about a letter he got or she got. And, you know, obviously she couldn't bluff very well, but it would have been easier for her to kind of, it's nothing, like it's my own business. But he didn't back down. And because he recognized just how upset she was. And so I think, that's really come to show, and it comes to show in his work too. And that's why he's so good at what he does, which he brought up. And so I think, but also we see that compassion because, yes, he's not backing down and she is going to, talk about it with him. But at the same time, he realizes that she kind of needs a moment. So he doesn't say anything. They just go get the dogs and start walking. And then when the time is right, he kind of brings it up when she's had time to kind of gather her thoughts. And so I think, it definitely shows both sides. And that's, we kind of got a glimpse of that when he was a child. And now we're seeing it in him as a man. So, and then Raylan offers some insight to the poet situation and says the poet doesn't know Adrian on a personal level. Do you agree with this? And for the most part, I do. I definitely don't think the poet is someone, at least in this point, that's part of her everyday life. And I think, they're definitely have studied her, and so the poet probably feels like they know her on a really personal level because they've studied her so intensely. But at the heart of it, you don't know her, or they don't know her, and so I don't think they know her on a personal level, and I think Raylan's right about that. Like they may think they know her and understand her, but at the heart of it, they don't. And we do see that later on, when Lena and her are talking. And Lena, no, he wanted to make you sad and, use your grief, whereas it just made you angry, So the poet, they don't recognize that. So we're going to go ahead and move on to chapter 15, and this is where the big spoiler is, and also, where the trigger warning comes into play. I only have a couple questions for this one, but the next chapter had more stuff, and so I put extra questions on the chapter 16, where this one only has a couple. But this chapter starts with autumn turning to winter, a new birth, a new year. Then it focuses on the planning of Dom's 95th birthday. Reading this chapter, did you have any sense of how it would end? And I did. I had a feeling, because the author kept bringing up Dom's age, like in previous chapters as well. And so I knew it was coming. And then the way this chapter was written, like she forwarded through a lot, So like the paragraphs were really kind of short and like just really quick pace. And then it kind of slowed down and focused on his 95th birthday. And so I just had a gut feeling that this was when he was going to pass. Like, I had a gut feeling, and then, obviously we know it. That's what happens. So, I wanted to bring that up because I'm curious to see if you guys kind of had that gut feeling, kind of how the chapter was paced and written out. Whether you guys had that same gut feeling or not, or if it was just me, I don't know. And then Adrian blames herself for not being there. Do you think Raylan handled the whole situation appropriately? And I really do. Like, again, we see that compassion and that intuitiveness. Because he can clearly see Dom's gone, but she is so upset, and I know she knows that he's gone, but she's not really quite ready to accept it. So instead of just saying he's gone, like, he goes through the motions of checking and making sure for her, and he recognizes that she needs that. But then at the same time, when she starts blaming herself, leaving him alone, it was, I stayed out too long and all that. He points out, no, like, he kind of called bullshit on it. And I was like, no, like, there's fruit and cookies and tea. He's tucked in by the fire. Like, this is such an idea. Like, you cared about him. Like, there's no way you could have known that this outing was gonna you were gonna come back to this. Like, there's no way you could have known. And so blaming yourself for not being here is kind of, he calls bullshit on it. And I really think, he handled that. Like, he shows the compassion, but at the same time he's like, no, like, he's quick to call her out when she's kind of being a little bit over the top about it. And he died peacefully, and he points that out and everything. And then, when he's trying to get her outside, she doesn't want to leave him alone. And I like how he said he's not alone, he's with Sophia now, because it's kind of straightforward, like, recognizing, like, that's just his shell. And then also, again, compassionate, um, saying that he's with his wife now, his soul is with his wife now. And so I thought just that whole situation, and he's been there, like, he's been through the grieving process, and so he understands, what's happening in her mind and everything. But I just think he handled it really, really well. So that's it for chapter 15. Like I said, there wasn't a whole lot to discuss on that chapter. And so we're going to go ahead and move on to chapter 16. Adrian followed her heart, putting together the memorial. Do you think Dom would have approved? And I really think he would have. She really followed her heart and thought about what he would have wanted, and the kind of person he was. And I think especially the heart of the memorial was the community, and even friends that have left the community and gone elsewhere. You know, that was the heart of who he was. He loved entertaining and, just connecting with people. And so I think, her following her heart and kind of thinking about what he would have wanted and not maybe what was, more standard, I think he would have approved, definitely. And let's see, Lena and Adrian discuss Adrian's biological father. Lena mentions multiple times that she isn't mother material. Is there anything that contradicts this and shows she is? And I think there's actually a couple things that show she is. The first one being when she's talking about, the night she went to tell Adrian's biological father that she was pregnant, and he was hitting her and trying to, cause a miscarriage. Um, she was kind of, Adrian was asking, why did you choose to keep me? And she was talking about that night and how I was just so shocked that he tried to kill us, and we were an us. And so that just shows kind of that she had that motherly instinct, before, when Adrian was just barely a thought. And so I really like that part. And then Adrian points out, the night that her father tries to kill them, the kind of mama bear came out, and she was just so focused on protecting Adrian. And then after the incident, she held her and everything, and she kind of points that out, and that shows that mama bear instinct too. So yes, she's not very motherly on the day to day, and she knows that, and she was able, and she has regrets about it, but she was able to provide Adrian with other people that kind of filled that role for her. And so I think, yes, she's not very motherly material, but at the same time, she's still a mama bear, for sure. So, and then the poet sends a poem using Dom's passing. Why do you think they switched up the material? Um, and I mixed up the questions. I skipped over one, and so, this one's kind of out of order, but I think they did this to make sure that she opened the poem. Because obviously she's grieving and such, and she has all this other mail to go through. And so she might not have opened it if it was how it traditionally looks and she recognized it as a poem from him. And so I think kind of switching up, the package, the envelope and then the card inside it and everything just kind of threw her off, so it ensured that she opened it. I think that's why they kind of switched it up a little bit. And then the next question is, we see a more sentimental side of Lena as she's opening the door for a more personal relationship with Adrian. Do you think their new collab at the local high school will help achieve this in any way? And I think it will, because it's kind of more Adrian's turf and Adrian's, vision. Where Lena's still gonna, kind of have her 2 cents in there, but she's kind of letting Adrian take the reins a little bit more. And it's a little bit more lighthearted too, like a friendly competitions between students and the teachers and those two as well. And so it's a little bit more lighthearted. So I think, the overall project is, kind of a good way, to still, I think it's a good way because we know Lena values the professional relationships of things so much more than like a personal relationship. And so it's kind of a way to kind of bridge that gap. It's still professional, but it's more lighthearted and has like a little bit of a personal touch, especially since Lena went to high school in that school. So I think it really is a good way. And then this is the first time Lena has taken the threats from the poet seriously, and she decides to hire a private investigator. Do you think EPI will have more luck than the FBI and police, or is it just a way for them to feel like they are being more proactive about the threats? And I think it's both. It's definitely a way for them to be more proactive instead of just sitting, and getting these threats. Um, but at the same time, a PI is going to be able to focus on the case where the FBI and the police can't. And it's not, like they mentioned, it's not a high priority because the poet has never actually acted on any threats at all. Like there's been no action, it's just the postcards. And so I do think a PI, is definitely a good smart way to go because they're going to be able to more focus on the case. But at the same time, I also feel it's a way for them to, instead of just sitting and kind of taking the threats, a way for them to be more proactive. So, and then the last question, I previously leaned toward the poet being male, but has been brought up multiple times the possibility of them being female. Do you think the author is hinting at this and giving a clue? And I do, because it's been brought up, by different characters, and it's been brought up multiple times. I kind of think she is hinting that it might be a female. The only thing throwing me off is how much hatred the poet has for females. And that it could still be a female, and they hate, sluts and whores. Their words, not mine. But at the same time, that's kind of what's hanging me up. Like, just the derision they have kind of makes me lean more towards Mel, but the fact that the author is so pointedly, having these characters mention that it could be a female, is kind of making me start to sway and lean more towards a female. I'll probably still call the poet a he going forward until we know for sure. But I am starting to think that it actually might be a female and not a male. So those are the questions for this week. Of course, this next week we are reading chapters 17, 18, 19, and 20. So definitely, like I said, read those chapters and come back next Monday and we will discuss those chapters. Happy reading, everyone. Bye.